Hello all, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that the Western world feels like it's in a state of terminal decline at the moment. It feels as if our civilization is exhausted. And this state alone challenges the very conception of history that liberalism presents, which is something more like a linear model of advancing morally and technologically till we get to the utopian end point. Yet as each year passes and we degrade a little more, this way of viewing history looks increasingly naive, another utopian vision of the Enlightenment. And this has led many people, especially on the dissident right, to look at counter-models of reading history, perhaps most famously the cyclical model of history. While this line of thinking doesn't deny that we may technologically advance along a linear narrative, its broader claim is that civilizations follow a sort of life cycle, a pattern of awakening, maturation, decadence, and eventual collapse. Perhaps the most famous proponent of such a theory was the German thinker Oswald Spengler. He had a famously pessimistic view of the Western world, thinking it was pretty much all but over. You could still live heroically as an individual in the face of the decline, but the decline could not be arrested. Now, whatever your own personal line on this, and for what it's worth, mine is that rebirth is inevitable. However, that rebirth won't look like the England of past days. It will be something new. It is pretty undeniable that we are in the winter stage of our civilization. Now, thinking about all of this brought back a memory for me of well over 10 years ago when I was coming out of the degeneracy of the London lifestyle. I think I was hungover in bed watching clips from Question Time, and I remember this particular one with Peter Hitchens.
My advice to anybody young enough to do so is to emigrate before it's too late.
Oh, for goodness sake. I mean, this is just...
The paper that hates Britain, you heard it here.
This is a ridiculous counsel of despair.
Now, while I don't agree with Hitchens' recommendation to leave and find him quite truculent and cantankerous, he seems to always have to be right in a minority of one, it's undeniable that he does have an instinct that touches to the soul of Britain, and he could see the decline before many others. So you expect some histrionics from the audience who are very much locked in the liberal narrative of history, as well as from Owen Jones. I mean, he still thinks revolutionary communism is the future. But of course, what's most interesting about this clip is the disdainful reaction of Liz Truss. Famously, of course, she went on to lead the country as head of the Conservatives, quote unquote. Now, if you continue listening to that clip, I won't play it because she goes on for a while, she eventually says that she thinks that Britain's best years are ahead of us. And what would lead her to think that we've got multiculturalism now, mass immigration improves all of our lives, we've got rid of all the evil, toxic men, destroyed our tradition and religion? So whatever made the supposed conservative Liz Truss come up with that brain fart, who really knows? However, it's clear she's changed her mind and now agrees with Peter, as she published a book last year called 10 Years to Save the West. Now, I haven't read the book, but I'd assume it's just saying things like we need more free markets and a return to muscular Christianity and to push back against political correctness and so on. Basically stuff that satisfies the boomer generation who believe we can go back to the 80s and 90s and everything will be okay. Now, if I'm wrong about any of this, do let me know in the comments, but it seems to me these mainline Tory figures always massively underestimate the problems we face, which are structural at this point. I thought this was really nicely expressed by this guy Aaron McIntyre. Haven't watched much of his stuff, but I do think he made a really good point here. He states, in the West, the state is no longer the nation, and the nation is no longer the state. Their interests haven't just separated, they are actively hostile to each other. In order to understand this in its fullness, we must reaffirm what nation actually means. Of course, the root word in nation comes from the Latin natio, which means birth, origin, or breed. This is, of course, why England is called England. It's named after the Anglo people, same with Scotland and the Scots and so on. And the point here is that at one time, the nation became the representative of the collective will of the people, even before it was codified as a state. In fact, it was arguably the codifying of the nation in the form of the nation-state during the Enlightenment phase that led to the mess we're in now. Why? Because in this process, we gave birth to the managerial bureaucracy that's come to rule the West. In essence, this meant that our sense of belonging went from an implicit part of our being, something that exists naturally in our hearts, to a legal and political structure that any Tom, Dick and Harry, or should I say Tunde, Ahmed and Mohammed, can belong to. And as I've explored many times on the channel, money, power, globalist liberalism, it wants to push this mass immigration into the Western world, this destruction of identity and name it all as evil, because it gives it total control and power. If there isn't a cohesive group to push back, it has total dominance. And because we've broken down the shared structures and institutions that gave us meaning and orientation, we now find ourselves in a land of confused, competing narratives that grow like ivy around a dilapidated house. While many see England as the home of the Anglos that was built up from nothing, the very soil has the sweat, tears and blood of our ancestors to make it what it is. Such a worldview doesn't go down so well in the modern UK. It doesn't align with the liberal narrative. It's exclusive and bigoted. And don't you know the oppression you've caused people around the world and who really built the UK?
London is a city built by migrants. Whether it was the Irish in the 19th century, whether it was the Jewish community at the beginning of the 20th century, whether it was Commonwealth migrants after the Second World War, and whether it's the migrants that are coming today. London is a city that was built by migrants, and we will not allow fascists on the street here.
So, there you go. Britain was built by everybody except the British. Disagree? You're a fascist. Now, famously, dear old Diane Abbott isn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, so she doesn't understand here. She's not fighting, quote, fascism. She's actually preparing the ground for a strong leader to rise. Now, this is because Diane Abbott gets increasingly radical along with the Corbynites, and they argue with the Labour Party and they have their splinter disagreements, and eventually mass democracy gets so incredibly complex, everybody's arguing and can't agree on anything pretty much all of the time. You even get this on the right as well. I mean, one of the reasons I don't use Twitter is because everybody seems to hate each other for some very nuanced, complex reason. And they have endless spats in massive disagreement. I'm often thinking, this is a perfect example of why change doesn't come. We're in an era where it's very hard to unify, where everybody seems to be a law and a ruler unto himself. And all of this speaks to Spengler's analysis of how civilizations start to decline. People realize that the civilization is tired, nobody agrees on anything anymore, pleasure seeking is almost the central concern of many, and slowly, public trust erodes in the institutions and the government. People think things are corrupt, they're ideologically possessed. And eventually, this leads to a sort of craving of unity, a drive to make things make sense. And at that point, enters a strongman, or what Spengler refers to as a Caesar. What this figure does, rightly or wrongly, is simplifies the mass complexity, the mass uncertainty of the age and provides direction and structure. Bear in mind, we're entering an era where people are realising that Western liberal democracies aren't quite as democratic as they make out. Case in point, what can any European do now about the mass demographic replacement in their nations? They're told they're evil and conspiracy theorists if they so much as mention it. Despite voting against it again and again, you still get it. We're now at the point where YouGov are releasing polls stating 45% of Britons are at the point of supporting remigration now. Of course, in liberal modernity, you have to be curious as to what Brightons make up this research, but aside from that, that number is only going to grow, and the system is not going to do anything about it anyway, because it's controlled by globalist liberalism. In essence, if democratic solutions cannot be created for the will of the public, then people will start to look to non-democratic solutions. And to Starmer Stasi, who I think we all know watch these right-wing videos waiting for one of us to slip up so you can send a SWAT team round at 3 a.m, it's that tradition of free speech that Keir Starmer is so fond of, I'm not promoting any of this. I'm predicting it as a very likely outcome if the system remains as corrupt as it is. If people have these competing narratives that are getting endlessly complex, there will be a drive to try and create unity and certainty. Anyway, that's enough from me today. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.